Okay, I'd like to say something more about the state of mind that we're trying to cultivate with Vipassana. One of the very important associated states is upekkha, that is equanimity or neutrality of mind. And upekkha is a word that has some nuances of meaning depending on context. At the very simplest, most basic level, it can refer to a feeling tone of neutrality, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But as a developed spiritual faculty, it's has some different aspects, and actually should be classified as a sankhara rather than a vedana. And in terms of vipassana, there's a word that refers to the specific kind of equanimity that is required, and that is tatra majjhatthata. That has been translated commonly as specific neutrality, which is quite good. It captures the meaning quite well. A literal breakdown of the word would give us the state of being in the middle about that. Majja is middle, as in Majjhima Nikaya, middle length sayings, and tatra is a emphatic kind of pointing word. It means that, but quite specifically that which is the object of consciousness at this moment. So we're trying to be in the middle about that, not just generally in the middle, not a kind of fuzzy general state, but a very specific state. At this moment, and at each moment, consciousness is taking an object, a discrete, specific object that will be arising through one of the 6 sense consciousness, either the 5 physical senses or the mind sense. And we need to be in the middle about that. That is, to be neutral, to be neither swayed by desire or interest, or on the other side by revulsion or fear, or in the middle, not to ignore it. Our natural inclination is to be caught up in the sensory reaction, the emotive reaction to the sensory input, which is vedana, the khandha of feeling. And whenever an object impinges on the mind, the natural impulse is to go to pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, the neutral feeling. And if the object is pleasant, then we desire it, we want to hold on to it, we want to cherish it. If the object is unpleasant, then we turn away from it, we become upset or angry or fearful. And if the object is neutral, the tendency is to let it go, ignore it, not pay attention to it. But what we're trying to get past, this is exactly what we're trying to get past with Vipassana, are these reactions. We want to try and cultivate a state of mind that remains in the middle and observes each object with the same degree of attention and doesn't yield to the emotive response. This is sometimes difficult to do. And it's one of the challenges or the skills that need to be learned, is to clearly see the object without going into reaction. And it's difficult because the mind will sometimes produce objects that have some emotional resonance. For example, a memory that might be either pleasant or unpleasant. And the tendency is to get lost in the emotion and to follow that state of mind. It's natural for an emotional reaction to occur, in which case then that emotional response should become the object. That is now the object of consciousness. And consciousness can remain in the middle and be aware of the object, the thought, or the memory, and then the emotional response is also an object. And if there's a physical sensation in the body, some emotions can produce a somatic reaction, and we can have some kind of feeling in the body. That's to be noticed separately. So it's a real important part of the practice, is to break things up into their component parts and not to see things in a kind of clumpy way. As we have in the Satipatthana Sutta, a repeated refrain is when contemplating the body, contemplate just the body as body in the body, and feelings the same, and mental states and mental formations. Keep things separate and notice them discreetly. It's important to be clear about what we're trying to do here, which is this sharp, clear, precise noticing of phenomena. This is not analysis or trying to figure anything out. It's trying to work on an experiential level. What is the immediate experience right now, here and now? Not on a secondary level of trying to make connections or figure things out or analyze them. If the mind goes into those kind of games, then that's thinking or speculating, and that should be treated as an object. You can always step back into the knowing and treat everything which arises as an object. And the key to remaining in the middle is to remain solidly in the knowing. The knowing mind, the chitta, is that which is clearly aware of everything which arises, but is not affected by it. The chitta has only one function, and that is knowing. And knowing not in the sense of understanding or figuring out, but knowing in the sense of experiencing, of being present, being aware. That's all the chitta does. The chitta in and of itself is never happy or sad or bored or anxious or fearful, but it knows happiness and sadness, fear, anger, boredom, and the rest of it. It knows them as objects. So this is the fundamental duality of the mind. The last duality to go, the basic one, is subject-object. There's the object, whatever the phenomena or the Dhamma at the moment might be, and there's the knowing of it. And there's really no one doing it. It's just a natural process that's occurring. There's an object and knowing of the object. That is our whole life, our whole experience reduced to the most rudimentary level. It's what's occurring moment by moment. And we're trying to understand that by making it fully conscious. And it doesn't matter what the object is, whether it's something wonderful or something terrifying or something just neutral and boring. In its essence, it's just an object of consciousness. And consciousness is simply knowing the object. So try and avoid, as far as you can, getting into speculating or analyzing. There's an article I read once that was a very, very good article in many ways about meditation and psychology. And the author, who's a Western Dhamma teacher, he asked a Burmese Sayadaw once, why is it that in Burma, people make great progress very quickly with Vipassana, whereas in the West, we have students that have been practicing for many years and they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. What's the difference here? And the Sayadaw's answer was that in his experience of having taught Westerners, many of them are not doing Vipassana at all. They're doing self-psychoanalysis. Then the author of the article goes on to expand on that idea. And he made one remark that was quite sharp. He said that Vipassana should,
It's 10 o'clock.
Vipassana should be all about the process, not the content. That's why I suggest that when you put a label on something, you use a verb, because we're not or shouldn't be interested in the content of your memory, but the process of remembering. Or likewise, we're not interested in the content of the thought, but of the process of thinking. So you see thinking as a process. You see remembering as a process. You see it as a verb, as an action that the mind is doing. And you don't get lost in trying to uh, delve into the content. There, there can be a value in that kind of analysis in other ways, but it's not doing vipassana. You won't penetrate to any great depth in the practice if you get caught in that kind of processing. One other additional instruction I'd like to leave you with is that one particular class of objects is very important to try and gain an awareness of is intention, cetana. This can yield a lot of value if you become more and more conscious of intention. And to begin with, coarse bodily intentions. So when you're sitting in meditation, if you ever feel the need to adjust your posture, like your leg is getting stiff and you want to cross it the other way, or you want to straighten your back, or whatever it might be, any small movement of the body, you should never just do it sort of impulsively. You will first notice and mark the sense of physical discomfort. Then before you move, you notice the intention to move. Whenever we move the body, with the narrow exception of some kind of reflexive movement, like if you touch a hot stove by accident, your hand jerks away. Any other normally in any movement of the body will be preceded by an intention in the mind. The body cannot move without that intention. So first there'll be an intention before the body even begins to move. Then you'll notice the movement of the body. And if you ever move physically without having previously noted the intention, then that can tell you, you can still learn from that, because that tells you, oh, I've missed something. I'm not being sharp enough. Here I've moved the body without noticing the intention. There's been a gap in my mindfulness. So when you, for example, change postures, you go from walking to sitting or sitting to walking, try and do that very mindfully, and noticing the intentions and the movements as you change postures. That's an important opportunity for developing that. Then there are subtler intentions. If you get good at noticing the bodily intention to move, there are some subtler bodily intentions that are on the border of being automatic, but they're not quite. One of them is swallowing. Periodically, our mouths fill up with saliva and we swallow. You do that several times in an hour. And normally we're not conscious of it, pay no attention to it. It's very trivial. But if we're trying to develop this very keen, sharp mindfulness, then you will first notice the sensation of discomfort of the mouth being full of saliva. Then you notice the intention to swallow. Then you notice the swallowing. if you're able to do that, there's even one very, very subtle intention, and that's when the eyes are open. There's an intention to blink. If you can catch that, you're doing really well. But there's also an intention in the mind, purely nothing to do with physical movement. There's the intention to think. When a thought is a comically active action done with the mind, and every thought has a subtle volition behind it. And if you can notice the intention to think before you think, then you can make the mind very quiet, because the mind will be quiet, and then you'll notice it feels almost like something gelling together, the sort of impulse in the mind, something's bubbling up, but there's no content yet. It's not a thought about anything, but it's a movement of the mind towards thought. It's an intention to think. If you notice that, you can stop the process there and not have a fully articulated thought arise in the mind at all. And the mind can be very, very quiet. And if you're practicing that way, if you reach that level, you're at a very subtle level of vipassana. You're noticing very subtle objects. So we have this this challenging practice. It's not always easy. It's often a very difficult practice, but it's very rewarding, because this is the process that develops wisdom and eventually leads to liberation of the mind. And the perfect culmination of this practice is the when one reaches a state that's called equanimity about formations, and that's as far as you can get by effort, by practice. And at that point, there's no sense of putting in any effort, but the practice unfolds perfectly. You don't have even a sense that you're meditating. You're just sitting there, but the meditation is flawless. And it's from that point that the unconditioned can be realized. It's not something that we can do or will, but it's possible at that point. So I'll leave you with those reflections for this morning, and I'll be going to my meal now, and I'll see you again for the Dhamma talk in the afternoon at 1:30.